99% of people out there really don't know what a hard set really is like. And that's because they probably haven't tried it. It could be fear, fear of failure, of failing on that set. I get that. But if you don't try it, if you don't reach for it, you'll never find it. And if you never find it, you'll never achieve it. So, again, we don't want to train to be average, right? Because if what's the point of training to be average? You want to train to be a dangerous human, a really smart, dangerous, powerful human. That's what you want to do. You want to be like above average, and always try that relentless, continuous improvement, be it in, mind, spirit, and body. You always want to try and grow more, be more. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Rest 41 podcast. I am your host, as always, Gonzo Herrero. And today we're going to talk about something that's been on my mind for a while. And it'll be, this will be part of a new series where it's just like my thoughts on different subjects and topics. Hopefully, you'll find them interesting. Today is why are most science-based lifters still look like they're NPCs? As simple as that. So if science built great physiques, every exercise science grad would look like a comic book character, right? And they don't. They look like customer support, really. So what's up with that? So let's start. Okay, I know that was uncomfortable. Let's start with that, with a little humor, okay, guys? Most science-based lifters don't look very impressive at all. They don't look terrible. They don't look weak or anything, just average and forgettable. They look like the default character that you get when you start a video game before you unlock your special armor and character and customizations and all that. Just kind of generic, NPC type physiques, bodies that are like made for a side quest and traps that are like for a tutorial. Again, and before you'll start foaming at the mouth, let's make one thing clear. This essay, if you will, or this vlog isn't anti-science, okay? This is anti-science, anti-using science as a shield against effort. And that's kind of like the larger point that I'm hopefully going to make here with a little bit of humor, okay? Because science didn't fail you, okay? You never applied it appropriately or with actual violence. That's what I'm thinking. But anyway. So the first part of this, why most science-based people don't look like super jacked Olympic-type heroes. It's this. Let's strip the paint off this word. So science-based, the first point is that science-based for some people is a rebrand of fear. And what do I mean by that? Let's strip the paint off the word. So science-based used to mean I use evidence to guide decisions. But for some people, now it means I don't want to suffer and I want to feel pretty intelligent about it and sound good because I don't want to suffer. And most people aren't evidence-based, okay? They're effort avoidant with citations, basically. They just use the science to avoid effort. So they'll say things like, so the literature suggests diminishing returns if I do this, that, and the other thing. Or they'll say, training to failure isn't necessary because yada, 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 yada. The data shows more volume doesn't help. The more volume, the more work I do, it doesn't help. But what they mean is, I stopped it when it started burning. I stopped when it started getting really hard. And science didn't tell you to quit then. Your pain tolerance is what did. And pain tolerance is something that's trainable, okay? This is something that you can develop. You can become comfortable being uncomfortable. And that's where you actually start seeing some change, okay? But most people would rather read another study that confirms their bias rather than train another hard set, which is what you really want to do if you want to effect change, if you want to actually do that. So again, science is not what stopped your progress, okay? It was your fear of pain and of discomfort that did. And you're looking at science as an excuse to not put in that effort or to validate your lack of effort. Which brings us to the second point. Studies create average results, but that's by design, okay? So here's the dirty little secret no one says out loud. Studies are designed to find averages, not greatness. Okay, greatness is at the edges. Greatness is at the extremes. That's where you'll find greatness. That's what is greatness, right? Because if the average was greatness, then we'd all be great, but we're not. Okay, so a lot of these studies, think about it, when you read and you really take a look at the data, they're mostly done on untrained people or maybe some moderately trained people, people who don't live like bodybuilders. So already you have a data set that's not exactly the same data set that you would use from a bodybuilding perspective. I'm using bodybuilding as the example here. So when someone says something along the lines of like, so research shows that 10 or 20 sets per week is optimal, what they're really saying is this worked on people who don't scare anyone in a tank top. Like this worked on regular people. So regular untrained individuals. Elite physiques are not built in the center of that bell curve, okay? The average person's in the center of that bell curve. The exceptional people are built at the edges on this side, right? They're built where recovery starts getting dicey, where you're right on the edge, where fatigue starts stacking, where adaptation is forced because of that effort. You've made this effort, you're close to the edge, real effort that, with pain and discomfort. That's where the body is forced to adapt. If you stay in that comfortable medium of that bell curve, I mean, the body doesn't need to adapt to that. It'll just take the input, it'll survive it, and it'll recover, but it doesn't need to adapt because you didn't ask anything extraordinary from it. You didn't give it a stimulus that makes it go like, shoot, next time we gotta prepare. We gotta be bigger, harder, better in order to prepare for that stimulus. You didn't do that. So basically, I mean, you're training to be statistically average if you stay in the middle of that bell curve. If your training philosophy fits perfectly inside a meta-analysis, again, you're living in the middle of the bell curve. And if your training fits, really neatly in a spreadsheet, your physique probably does too. Which leads us to the third point of this rant essay, if you will. And it's this. Reps in Reserve has created a generation of very polite lifters. So let's talk about RIR culture, Reps in Reserve, because this one, I'm going to hurt feelings with this one. But again, it's part of the exposition. Hopefully this will lead some people to some good discussions in the comments. And hey, if you agree, disagree, whatever you think, just put it in the comments. Let's talk about it. But anyway, let's talk about Reps in Reserve culture. And because, again, not trying to hurt feelings on purpose, but I know it will. So RIR is just a tool, okay? Reps in Reserve is just a tool. But tools in the wrong hands can become weapons of self-sabotage, okay? So most lifters will claim something like they'll lift, they'll push, and then they'll say something like, that was RIR 2, maybe. And actually, it was RIR. I could have done 5 more, but I didn't really feel like it. It was too close to uncomfortable, okay? How do you know this? Cues that you weren't really RIR 2 and you were more like 5 and you weren't close to the edge. It's the bar speed never slowed. Your form never fought back. You didn't have to like fight the form to keep it. You never doubted the rep. At no point where you're like, no, I might not be able to complete this rep. That's important, okay? Because that means you weren't close, you weren't brave, okay? You were comfortable. And that's okay if that's what you want, but don't call it RIR2, okay? Because it's not. It's not RIR2. This is where NPC physiques are built, okay? By people who stop at discomfort. Because discomfort is when it's just getting good. Discomfort is where it starts getting to the stimulus that you actually do need to build that physique that you want to be exceptional, okay? And I've learned this too myself. It took a while. Like I actually was talking to one of my friends and fellow gym goers. It's almost like once you unlock this in your brain, it's like you find an extra gear. There's an extra gear in your gearbox that you're shifting. You go first gear, second, third, fourth, fifth, and wait, there's a sixth gear here. I can go faster, stronger. And you hit that. And that's where that lives. That RIR2, if you will, RIR1, you know? basically, think about this. If the set never scares you, it probably never changed you either. Okay. The set should, there should be that moment of like, oh, I don't know if I can actually finish this. That's how you know you're close to the edge. That's how you know you're truly, truly close to the stimulus you need that will effect change. Okay. And this leads to point number 4. And it's that science doesn't really measure the real limiter, which is your psychology. And what do I mean that this is where science kind of drops the ball, because studies will measure things like it'll study volume, it'll study load, it'll study frequency, but they can't measure some of the intangibles like hunger tolerance, your ability to withstand hunger, say when you're if you're in contest prep and you're trying to build a physique, your pain tolerance, again, that ability to be comfortable when it's uncomfortable. How far can you push it? That obsessive drive, that obsession, which will also help drive you. It'll help you push into those uncomfortable places that you need to go in order to get the change that you want to effect, right? If you want to get that change, you have to get into that uncomfortable space. And the other one, because as far as bodybuilding goes and growing muscle, it's boring. So boredom resistance, that's another thing that, science doesn't really measure, because I mean, doing the same thing day in, day out, which is bodybuilding is a long game. It's a game of time. And you have to be able to be okay. This is where the obsession kind of like complements that boredom resistance, right? Because you're obsessed with improving your physique and you're going to use that to have the discipline to drive past the boredom, right? And resist the urge to like just throw your hands up and be like, oh, this is boring, I don't want to do it. So bodybuilding isn't limited by physiology first, okay? It's limited by the person that quits early. That's a limiting factor, because if you quit early, you're not going to get the stimulus you need to get the changes that you want. The person who negotiates with discomfort, well, I'm close, but if I push it too far, then I'll be uncomfortable. That's not going to get you, again, close to that edge that you need in order to effect change. And the person that needs motivation instead of discipline, because motivation is a feeling and motivation comes and goes. There are days that I can't wait to get into the gym. Like I'm like super motivated. This is what I want to do. There are days that I hate it. Frankly, much as I love working out, there are days that I just don't want to go to the gym. And this is where discipline comes into play. And discipline doesn't give two craps about motivation. Discipline is the ability to say, yep, I'm not feeling it. I'm still going. And I'm still going to push hard AF just to get it done. So understand the difference between motivation and discipline. And we've got some episodes here on the podcast where we talk about that if you're interested in the difference between motivation and discipline, because there is a huge difference. They complement each other, they can. But in the grand scheme of things, discipline is the one that really counts, because that's the one that will always consistently get you going to the place you need to go in order to meet your goals and achieve your goals. So just remember, you don't build muscle with just volume. You build muscle with compliance under misery, because it's miserable, man. It's not comfortable. If it was comfortable, everyone would be jacked, you know? So NPC lifters, these science-based NPC types, they're optimizing for comfort instead of like for discomfort or for change. And they're looking for signs for excuses. Outliers, the guys that are exceptional, they optimize that tolerance. They get to the point of like, well, this sucks, but I'll tolerate it. And they keep pushing that tolerance further and further out, where it's harder and harder. They're comfortable, and they still go there, and they'll go there every single time. And that's the place where change happens. Which leads to point number 5. Minimum effective dose is the fastest way to stay super mid. And what does that mean? So minimum effective dose might be the most butchered concept in fitness history. So it was supposed to mean don't do stupid crap. Don't do junk volume. Don't do stupid things that don't actually effect change. Do the things that work. Focus on the things that work that will effect change. And that's what you want to do. You focus on those minimum effective exercises, movement patterns, lifts that will challenge you and effect change. But for some people, it means do the least possible and hope that genetics carries the rest. And that works maybe a little bit. Okay, fine. When you're new, right? Newbie gains. We've all heard about this. If you've never lifted before, even a tiny bit of stimulus will definitely create change, at least at first, right? Because your body's, oh, what is this? I've never done this. So there will be some change. If you're detrained, same thing. Again, because the stimulus, you have so little stimulus that even a tiny bit of stimulus will effect some change, at least at first, right? And when your expectations are low, because again, you have low expectations, so they're easy to meet, right? You don't need a lot of change and a lot of effort to meet low expectations. When you have high expectations, that's where it gets challenging, right? Now, if you've been lifting for years and you're still chasing that minimum required effort, your body already solved that puzzle. You're going to stay exactly like what you look like. This is why you see people at the gym that will go year after year after year. Now, there's a difference, I must say, between training and working out. There are some people that go to the gym to work out, as in maintaining, and that's their goal, to stay exactly where they are, just fit, where they can move, and they're happy with how they are. They're not looking for dynamic change or growth or anything. They just want to stay fit in whatever their current state is. That's one thing. But training to grow, training for hypertrophy, training to be a bodybuilder, say, now that requires, periods of excess. It's going to require some strategic overreaching always, constantly. And it's going to require some temporary imbalance because you need a stimulus that's greater and more uncomfortable than what you're used to, because that's what tells your body, hey, I need you to grow muscle to adapt to this new thing that we're trying to do that's very, very hard. And that's how you do that, okay? The NPC lifter, the guy who's kind of mid, wants that eternal balance, and then they stay the same because the stimulus is just enough to keep them where they are and not so little to lose what they have, but they don't gain. They just kind of stay there mid, an elite lifter, somebody who's big and strong, will accept some temporary chaos, some discomfort, just to be able to get the stimulus they need to achieve that goal. And they will do this consistently, right? That's the whole concept of overloading, of constant overloading, consistent overloading, just over and over and harder and more difficult. So think about this. Keep this thought in mind. Like, you don't plateau because you're doing too much, okay? You plateau because you refuse to do more. And that's why you stay stuck there. Because once you hit that plateau, this is when you need to do more to break through that plateau. Because if you stay there, there's no stimulus. Your body says, I've got what you need to do that. We can do this. We can do this all day long. We can stay here forever. I've achieved that. So again, you don't plateau because you're doing too much. You plateau because you refuse to do more. So keep that in mind. Which takes us to our sixth point, that bodybuilding specifically is visual and science hates that. The elephant in the room, guys, okay? Looking jacked is not a peer-reviewed outcome. You don't have like 10 scientists going like, hey, this guy's like super jacked. And this guy is 9.7% jacked. And this guy is 6.6% jacked. There's no such thing. There's no study measures. Does this person look dangerous in a fitted t-shirt? It's not like an objective scientific observation. Okay? Like, they'll measure, so science will measure certain things, like muscle thickness. You can get some really good lean mass estimates, your torque outputs, the force, and things like that. But bodybuilding is basically, look, it's density, it's maturity, that muscle maturity, its proportions, and its presence. All right. Now we're talking about bodybuilding specifically. And those can only come from like years under load, near failure reps, a lot, and accumulated fatigue and recovery cycles over time, over a long period of time. Again, remember, it's a long game. So if your training never feels slightly irresponsible, don't be surprised when your physique never intimidates anyone. And science can tell you what's safe, but it can tell you what looks impressive. That's subjective. So that's another thing that you have to keep in mind. That science can really quantify that. That's the big X factor. Some people got it, some people don't. But the common thread is those that do have it have worked very hard for it. And it's not just simple scientific efficient lifting that got them there. There was some insanity and some off balance stuff, temporary chaos, to use that term again, in order to achieve those things. Which brings us to the seventh point and the real formula, really. All kidding aside, use the scientific principles. So science, but add aggression to it. And what do I mean by that? Let's try and land the plane, all right? Don't abandon science, okay? There are very, very important, valid facts that are scientifically based for bodybuilding and muscle building and for fitness that you can count on. Calorie calculations, again, torque, measuring strength, weight, reps, volume, all these things. These can be measured in a scientific way. As a matter of fact, a logbook is a very scientific measure of progress. To give you an example, where I can see my weights going up over time and my reps, so I can see myself getting stronger. That's a pretty objective measure, right? But the thing is, again, don't abandon science altogether. Just demote it a little bit. Science should help you in the following ways. Use science to set some guardrails, right? To protect yourself. So you don't do anything that's like patently stupid, okay? The reps in reserve rant from earlier, use that intelligently. You don't want to go to failure every single set, every single time, all the time. That's like a recipe for injury, especially as you get older, to use a very high level example. So, again, use that science and scientific facts to set some guardrails that will keep you safe and healthy, to prevent stupidity, because science will indicate certain things that are stupid that you should not do. So learn those, Another thing that science is pretty good at is, if you're careful, managing recovery. The idea of the different methodologies that you can use in order to manage your recovery as you work out, science can definitely help you with that. It definitely can give you some very clear indicators and practices that are scientifically based to manage your recovery. But progress now, it requires loads that will humble you. There's no real scientific way to say that, like, a really heavy load. Well, what is that? It's the one that makes you uncomfortable. How uncomfortable? Well, that's where it's not so much science as much as it's almost like an art. I'm figuring that out. What is the load that's perfect to produce this hypertrophy, to produce this change that I want to produce? Sets you don't want to finish. Again, science is not going to tell you what that is. You can make some scientific observations off of that, like, so today I did 3 sets of 10, 11, and 12, and that felt really awful. Next time I'm going to try and do 11, 12, and 13. Let me see. And then next week you try it and you see, maybe you hit that progress. Maybe you don't equal it. Okay, no progress, but it didn't get weaker. Maybe you can't hit that. I'm a little weaker. Maybe, perhaps start looking at those trends and those numbers, maybe. Yeah, basically, faces that feel uncomfortable to explain. Those are things that science is not really very good at explaining, like those variations. Because remember what we talked about before, there's drive and subjectivity. If I'm really motivated to do something, I might be able to push through a little extra. There's that X factor, right, if you will, of neural drive, of desire. Maybe that day I'm like really that day I'm really engaged. I'm really dialed in and I get that extra rep. The other day I'm distracted. I did sleep well maybe the night before and I don't get that extra rep. That's fine. Science, it's hard for science to quantify those things. So think about this. So science helps keep you alive, and effort is what's going to make you formidable. That's those two things together, okay? NPCs will read studies all day long, and outliers that achieve things will apply those principles until adaptation is forced. Again, going to the edge. So science might define your floor, and suffering is what's going to build that ceiling that you're reaching for. And you're going to live somewhere in between there, hopefully reaching for that ceiling every time so you can get better and better. So, all right, that's all I got. So if this episode pissed you off, all right, that's good. That's friction. It's probably a little bit of growth. Science won't save you from mediocrity. It just tells you where the average lives. And effort decides, your effort is going to decide how far you climb past that, past that average. So anyway, if you want to go ahead and share this with someone who's been optimizing for 5 years and still looks the same, it'll piss them off for sure. But maybe, all kidding aside, um, even though this may be a kind of a controversial take on the topic, hopefully it'll make you think and it'll make you realize that you can do more than you think you can. Your edges and your tolerance and your ability to push is more than you think for 99% of people out there. 99% of people out there really don't know what a hard set really is like. And that's because they probably haven't tried it. It could be fear, fear of failure, of failing on that set. I get that. But if you don't try it, if you don't reach for it, you'll never find it. And if you never find it, you'll never achieve it. So, again, we don't want to train to be average, right? Because what's the point of training to be average? You want to train to be a dangerous human, a really smart, dangerous, powerful human. That's what you want to do. You want to be like above average, and always try that relentless continuous improvement, be it in mind, spirit, and body. You always want to try and grow more, be more. So anyway, if you like this content, tell me, maybe you didn't like it, maybe you hated it. Put it in the comments, let me know. Click the link, subscribe. I'll be doing more videos of this nature where I'll pick a topic and just tell you, just rant a little bit about it and tell you how I feel. And hopefully this will lead to some conversations that will be beneficial for some people and will, hey, cause conversation. Somebody will grow, somebody will benefit from it. Ultimately, that's what I would like, is that this information helps people, helps them be better, become better, grow, and achieve their goals. So ultimately, because it's about overcoming, right? It's about overcoming and being better. That relentless pursuit of improvement, spiritually, mentally, physically. And with that, this is Gonzo from Rise 41. I'm out. Hope you enjoyed it. Bye bye. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day.